And I'm going to admit all of our guests.
Thank you, Tamara. Good luck, everyone.
And welcome, everyone. We will be getting started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, and so I want to welcome everyone to the New York Space Business Roundtable, where we are getting ready to have a conversation. We will be putting the G into the ESG with our conversation, good governance. What is it good for? Why does it matter? My New York comes out of me when I start saying, what's it for? But before we start the video, before we start the show, we're going to actually see a video, part of our Better Satellite World campaign. And I'm going to hope that you enjoy this. We will start now.
The year was 1908, and the automobile was the prestige product of the age. Designed by brilliant engineers with names like Daimler and Benz, they were built one at a time by skilled craftsmen and sold in small numbers to the very wealthy. In that year of 1908, it all changed, because that was the year when the first Model T rolled off Henry Ford's assembly line. The car cost $23,000 of today's dollars, and the price fell every year until a decade later, Model Ts made up half of all cars in America. Ford conquered the market by making cars simpler and more standard, and by creating that famous assembly line to produce them in large numbers with consistent quality. Today, that same revolution is coming to a product that is literally out of this world. For decades, skilled engineers and technicians have been building satellites designed for unique missions and making them one at a time. They have delivered 1 or 2 dozen per year, each with a high price tag, and each designed to operate for decades in high orbit around Earth. But the business of space is changing as companies begin putting dozens or hundreds or thousands of satellites in orbit. Satellites whose cameras reveal Earth's secrets in astounding new detail. Satellites whose antennas bring high-capacity communication to the remotest corners of the globe. Space is nothing like the roads traveled by the Model T. It is airless, freezing cold and blazing hot, and flooded with radiation. Building for it is hard. But the assembly line has come to the manufacturing of satellites, and nothing will ever be the same again. In a new factory near Cape Canaveral, Florida, OneWeb Satellites operates the most automated assembly lines in the business. They run in a clean room the size of 24 basketball courts that keep them free of contaminants that could lead to failure in space. Components arrive at the building in a steady stream from a supply chain that stretches around the world. 2 weeks later, finished satellites emerge from the other side at a rate of up to 2 per day. In between is the assembly line, where engineers, technicians, tools, and robotics take part in a complex dance of creation. They build components into standard modules, and automated vehicles carry them to an assembly station, where teams assemble them into finished satellites. At each step, there are automated tests to check quality. Satellites that fail are sidelined for repair. And the testing isn't finished when the satellite is in one piece. It goes next into one of 32 special chambers for 2 days of testing to make sure it can survive the trauma of rocket launch and work reliably in the airless, blazing, and freezing conditions it will meet in space. Only when it has passed this battery of tests is it ready to be racked and stacked for its journey to the launch pad. Forecasters see an exciting future for space and satellite. Step by step, we are laying the foundations of a $1 trillion space economy, reaching from the Earth to the Moon and Mars. And with each step, life on Earth gets better. Fewer lives are lost to disaster, disease, and poverty. More food reaches the hungriest thanks to data from space. More people connect to broadband by satellite. And new industries begin putting the limitless resources of space to work for everyone. Rocket launches are thrilling, and rocket landings are a marvel. But it is on the humble assembly line that the future is taking shape every day. Space and satellite, the world's invisible, indispensable technologies. Brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International, with the support of OneWeb Satellites. Additional support provided by AVL Technologies.
I hope you all enjoyed that. And so with that, I am now going to invite Mr. Lou Zaccarilla to join us and to kick us off.
Well, thank you, Tamara. Thank you for the introduction. The Better Satellite World Series video you just saw made its debut last year at the Future Leaders Dinner in Silicon Valley. And so we thank OneWeb Satellites and AVL Technologies for their underwriting of it. We show it to you today because as we continue our monthly dialogue, we are reminded that we are now, as Ford Motors became in 1908, an industrial industry, one where scale, market affordability, and perhaps an entire way of life, even of consciousness, are being hammered into shape like a steel fender from those old days. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Lou Zaccarilla of SSPI. Welcome to the monthly New York Space Business Roundtable. On behalf of SSPI and the New York Space Alliance, we're delighted that you're here. These dialogues take place on the third Wednesday of each month, and we're pleased that you have given up your precious time to be with us. Well, today's conversation will look at one of human society's most necessary functions, which is governance. What does it mean in the context of corporate and national purpose in an age when space and satellites are proposing dreams of new adventure and wealth that is unimaginable? Of course, when humans dream these dreams, they often come with the 7 deadly sins, or what we euphemistically call the human condition. Well, we'll see about that, and we'll see how that fares as we go forward. Before we begin a conversation with a very, very unique group of people on this subject, I want to give a special thanks to the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office for their support. Also to Space News, our media partner. Additional support for the 2021 series is provided by the Washington Space Business Roundtable and World Teleport Association, and by the 3,000 members of Space and Satellite Professionals International. Thank you. SSPI is again pleased to be partnering with the New York Space Alliance. NYSA established this Space Business Roundtable, and we are pleased that we've been able to revive it and to work with its co-founder, Joe Fargnoli, to bring it back and to focus it on issues that will impact us on so many levels. Finally, a shout out to Tamara Bond-Williams, our producer and membership director of SSPI. If you're interested in SSPI as a member, please contact Tamara. With that, I will turn it over to my fellow New Yorker, as in upstate New York, Joe Fargnoli. Good morning, Joe.
Hey, good morning, Lou. Thanks. Hey, the New York Space Alliance is very glad to be holding this New York Space Business Roundtable partnered with SSPI. We are bringing the roundtable back with the topic of ESG, which we see as a reset opportunity in the framework of thought in the space industry, as there's a strong sense of wanting to improve the social and economic life for all of Earth's inhabitants. Underlying the idea of ESG, we see the impetus in our thought being a greater realization of the foundational principle of the reality of the oneness of humanity, along with all of its ramifications. Some call this the overview effect, and that the advancement of the dynamic coherence between the material world and the aspirations of the human spirit can and needs to lead to disinterested service to the cause of humanity. And that efforts to engage in social action are given a vital impetus by information and principle-based discussions such as what we are offering here today to produce a commitment to transformation resulting in community building and advancement. The Space Business Roundtable seeks to encourage a process of action, reflection, and consultation, which we hope will lead to meaningful social action by helping to advance the critical capacity to apply ESG principles and of the manifold dimensions of social existence through the reading and addressing of social reality as we collectively seek to address the barriers that inhibit our ability to work together as a global community, as we seek to use space entrepreneurship as a source of social good. We are starting to see a set of voluntary principles incorporating ESG issues move into institutional investment decision-making, principles such as that of sustainable responsible investment. Our goal is to help the community decide the best path to implement these worthy concepts in light of their reality. Neither NYSA or SSPI desire to push an agenda here, nor will we allow one to be pushed on our collaborators. What we want to create is a sensible, non-political, open and frank conversation where we can explore these topics together and co-generate a framework that can help our new space community advance. We hope that this session is enjoyable and dedicated to addressing the deeper realities that we think will shift entire societies, industries, and nations, and the shared destiny of mankind. With that, we've lined up a very deep bench of experts today. I want to start by introducing Mr. Dylan Taylor. Dylan is a global business leader and philanthropist. He is an active pioneer in the space exploration industry as a CEO, investor, thought leader, and futurist. Currently, Dylan serves as the chairman and CEO of Voyager Space Holdings, a multinational space holding firm that acquires and integrates leading space exploration enterprises globally. As an early stage investor in more than 50 emerging ventures, including Acheon, Kepler, York, Astrobiotic, Leo Labs, Relativity, Planet, and Space for Humanity, Dylan is widely considered the most active private space investor in the world. Erica Pandy is a business reporter at Axios. She's been writing about how a growing number of companies see value in embracing societal issues, which has led to the idea of a purpose-focused executive. This new class of executives is neither the CEO nor the CFO. They are the CPOs, or Chief Purpose Officers. Abhas Maski has been directly involved in 4 different satellite CubeSat projects, placing 7 satellites in orbit, building and launching also the first satellite of Nepal, Nepali Sat-1. He is actively working towards educating Nepal's next generation through hands-on educational satellites called CanSats, since launching Nepal's first training in 2016. Jason Rainbow is the senior staff writer at Space News, focusing on satellite, telecom, finance, and commercial markets, and has spent more than a decade covering the global space industry as a business journalist. So with this great lineup, this session today is going to look at the role of good corporate and national governance as described in ESG and the potential role in developing the space economy. We're going to probe a number of very interesting questions. such as will the new space economy neatly fall under current structure of national governments and corporations? Is our current model of organization sufficient, or might we explore new models? Can we develop new frames of organization that will unleash new pools of investment? We want to really challenge the frontiers here. So please, thank you very much for joining us as we examine how getting the G right will create business opportunities for the space industry. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jason Rainbow, who will be our moderator for today's session.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here again, discussing ESG in space. Governance is a critically important element of this, of course. It's an element with implications for not only how space businesses operate, but potentially also for humanity as we start thinking about extending the benefits of exploring more of space to more people. Our primer on ESG last month looked closely at the role of space technology in helping companies from outside of the space industry improve their ESG metrics, which, as we discussed, are becoming an increasingly important part of how every company operates across all industries. But space also has a number of unique ESG considerations too. And our talk today about governance will probably be more inward looking to that effect. It used to be that only performance and cost mattered when it came to building and launching spacecraft. And now space companies of all sizes are adapting their operations to align with the growing importance of sustainability. And it's also important to note that space is a very high profile and visible industry. So how it governs itself ripples across other sectors too. But that said, there are also trends that pose challenges, or at the very least questions, for space governance, as you just outlined there, Joe. There's a growing trend toward nationalist mentalities across governments that may be at odds with the global nature of space. There are questions about whether billionaires that are really pushing the envelope for what can be achieved in space are moving in a direction that will benefit the masses. And then, particularly in the US, there are financial vehicles like special purpose acquisition companies that are changing the game for early stage space businesses, but also bring new issues for governance. We've got about 30 minutes to get through as much of this as we can. And then I think about 30 minutes toward the end of this session to put audience questions to the panel. So please do submit those through the Zoom platform whenever you have them, and we'll get to those in the second half of this session. Right, so I think it's important to start with a look at diversity and inclusion in space, which is a vital element for good governance. It's increasingly seen as not just a nice to have, but a must have for any company in the eyes of customers, investors, financiers. And Dylan, if I'm right, Voyager is one director away from having a majority female board. That's not something you see really in aerospace. So can you tell us a little bit about why that was important to achieve and what Voyager sees as good governance in space?
Yeah, Jason, thanks for the question. And indeed, you're correct. We hope to add an additional female director ahead of a public offering, and hopefully we'll be the first aerospace company with a majority female board and a very rare publicly traded company with a majority female board. And I should point out, our directors are complete rock stars. So this notion that you need to sort of compromise quality of director for diversity is just not true. It's just simply not true. People aren't trying hard enough, in my view. But so why does it matter? You know, certainly there are companies that want to check the box and demonstrate that they're being responsible. That's one path. To me, that's not the reason to do it. The reason to do it is because you get better outcomes. And study after study, it's been looked at, you know, by researchers all around the world. And the fact is, when you have diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of viewpoint, you get to better answers. And I think I've reflected deeply on why that's the case, Jason. And I think part of it is the opposite. If you think about what happens in the opposite scenario, oftentimes when you're in a room with people who think similar to the way you think, you run the risk of so-called groupthink, which is actually a term. And it's a decision-making folly that a lot of companies fall into. And it's basically where you have a confirmation bias. Everyone's nodding their head, yes, 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 yes. And there's no one in the room who sees it differently. And so I believe passionately that D&I is important for all the societal reasons that are obvious, but it also has a business implication, which is you get better outcomes. And I think you have a higher quality company. And then the third point, last point I'll make, Jason, is I think if we want to diversify any industry and make sure that we're training the next generation leaders, and space is hard, right? We can't open the high frontier with 10% of our society or 20% of our society. We need 100% of our society. And if we're going to motivate that next generation, they need role models and they need people to look up to. And it can't just be the standard, forgive the term, but white guys in a three-piece suit. It just can't. So that's the way we look at it. And again, I just want to reiterate this notion that somehow you need to compromise quality to implement D&I is just simply false. It is not true. So I'll close with that.
So in your view, you're spoiled for choice as it relates to the talent that's out there, and there's really nothing holding others in space back from having more diversity.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the analogy is maybe they're not first degree connections on LinkedIn, but if you just take that extra step and just look, outside your immediate, friend group, if you will, there are tons of qualified people out there that are eager to participate. So yeah, I honestly, I don't think people are trying hard enough. I think they do what's easy. People get busy. They want to check the box. They want to add a director. The first person that comes to mind is the first person they call. And I just think that's a mistake. That's not a good approach.
Okay, and Abbas, you're at the early stages of setting up a framework for Nepal's first space agency. And I know you're looking at how other space agencies operate and foster good governance. Can you tell us a little bit about the process you're currently in right now?
So in case of Nepal, we launched the first satellite only a couple of years ago. And that's not even a big satellite, that's just a CubeSat, that's a kilo in space, right? But still, it's a significant step. In case of Nepal, what we do see is a top-down approach where we first launched a satellite, then we think about infrastructure, then we think about policy development, and that's how it's moving forward, right? And with our next project, which is the second generation of satellite that we are building in-house, what we're trying to do here is develop the infrastructure, create the cliched capacity building. And also, we're working closely with the government to set up frameworks to establish the National Space Agency. Now, the problem with that is the government doesn't have enough resources, human resource, to develop those policies. So they're outsourcing to people who can. And that's where we come into. But the problem again is that we don't have enough people to give that framework. So it's sort of a chicken and egg problem where we're trying to develop policies, sure, but we're also side by side developing the capacity so that they have seen a space system, they understand space laws, they see how other countries are developing, especially with China and India very close to us. We are looking at them as well. One interesting example that we are looking at is also the Filipino Space Agency, how they are developing, how they're moving forward. And these give us a good framework to work with and to plan ahead. That's currently what we're doing in Nepal.
What are some examples that you consider to be good governance that you're looking to set up in Nepal? Because you have the opportunity here to build out something effectively from scratch, right?
Right, correct. I think what we're looking for is one, equity and inclusiveness. So both of them critical in good governance, I suppose. Well, if you just look at the general term of good governance, you think about good decision-making processes, you talk about how implementation is important. While we think about equity and inclusiveness, what I like to stress out is again, time and again, we have seen that the government and the organizations here are making good decisions. They are making good decisions. The policies are okay. If you look at the non-space policies with education, with everything, it's good. But when it comes to implementation, it's really not on par to any other country, right? So it has to really improve in that implementation stage. That's where the youths come in. That's where we come in. I think the system has to change in a way that policies are okay, but implementation has to improve. And I think that way we can improve the governance in Nepal.
Very good. Thank you. And Erica, turning to you, you write a lot about technology companies and ESG issues. What are some examples of bad governance that you've come across, and what lessons are there for space companies looking at improving their organizations?
So I want to say, I love Dylan's point about women on boards. And just to add a couple of stats to that, Latinos account for 18% of the US population, but they occupy just 3% of Fortune 1000 board seats. And then if you look at Black Americans, they make up 13% of the workforce, but even below boards, they only occupy 4% of even manager, VP, and SVP roles. So, in addition to gender diversity, racial diversity is super important, especially in space, like you say, because it is an industry that's about the future and charting our future, and we should have all people as a part of that discussion. So I think bad governance, as it relates to DEI, is when companies are super secretive, especially publicly traded companies, about what their staff looks like, what their leadership looks like. I think companies have a real way to make a difference here by, as Dylan is doing, publicizing when they're hiring folks that are outside of the norm, getting that information out there, because then their competitors are looking and saying, okay, they did it, we can do it too. And I think another issue is, like, it's all about talent now, as it relates to DEI, as we're saying. And like Dylan is saying, a lot of people are recruiting just in their circles. It's so important for companies, especially companies in the space that are looking into the future, to have really robust HR and recruiting departments. People that are devoting their entire workdays to looking beyond the immediate circle of the CEO, looking far and wide for a pipeline of more diverse executives, more diverse leaders. And then if that pipeline doesn't exist, helping to build it. I mean, these companies are super rich. They've got the resources to look at middle schools and high schools and colleges and start to train the next generation of space professionals and make sure that group has people from all backgrounds, from all walks of life.
I'm sure we've all heard a lot about the war for talent that's currently raging across multiple industries at the moment, prompted in part by the pandemic. In space, there can't be that many rocket scientists to go around. How important is good governance for attracting top-notch talent, and how has that perhaps changed in recent years?
So, I mean, a job used to be a job for people, and that has really changed, and the pandemic has accelerated that change. So especially younger people, they want to work for companies that they believe in. They want to work for companies that that they can feel proud of, telling their friends at a happy hour, I work for this company, this is something we're doing. And so good governance, all of ESG really matters there, because young people, they're increasingly not religious. They're increasingly delaying starting families. So the sense of purpose they get in their life isn't coming from religion, isn't coming from family, it's coming from work. And so companies have to fill that role and be a lot more holistic for their employees, especially when they're attracting the fresh college graduates. An increasingly higher percentage of them are saying, I want my employer to speak out on social issues, such as Black Lives Matter. I want my company to stand for something beyond just profit. And you saw that in the Business Roundtable meeting in August of 2019, when a big shift happened and CEOs came together and said, companies will have to stand for something more than just the bottom line. And so that's becoming super, super important, especially in the war for talent, especially in the war for young talent.
Dylan, do you have anything to add to that, and maybe to touch on how important transparency is for Voyager and space in general?
Yeah, great points by everybody. I just want to circle back on the diversity of race issue that Erica raised, which is great. Within our female directors that we've added, 2 of those directors are also racially diverse as well. So again, I just go back to the point that this notion that you can't find directors is just false. It's just completely false. But look, I think it's about leadership. I do think it's about publicity, but I don't think it's chest pounding like we're so great. I think it's more the conversation we're having today to say, look, it's valuable. It's the right thing to do societally, but it's the right thing to do from a business standpoint. And it's really not that hard. If you focus on it, you can do it. So I think, to me, that's more the conversation. And then the flip side is, I think we need to hold companies accountable that aren't taking this seriously. And I think we need to move beyond the check the box. I really do. I've spent a lot of time over my career with the World Economic Forum, and when you spend time over there, you realize there are people who believe in the mission and there are people who don't. And I think we just need to hold people accountable to the spirit of what we're talking about here, and not the hey, I want to check the box so that we can not get picked on. That's just not the spirit of what we're talking about here. So I think that's important. There's a movement within public companies, of course, to have ESG investors that are holding these companies accountable. I think that's one area to do it. I totally agree with the point that was made earlier that people coming out of college are looking for a purposeful company, a company with integrity, a company with values. I think that's a great trend. So I think just more discussion, Jason, and more, I think, I don't want to use the word shame, but we've got to hold companies accountable that aren't taking this seriously. We really do. It's 2021, it's not 1984, right? So we need to move on here. And frankly, we're not making enough progress. We're just not. It's too slow.
Well, talking about moving beyond checking the box, as it relates to governance, how far should that extend beyond your own organization and how it's run? How important is diversity and inclusion in the supply chains you use, for instance?
I think in my view, it's critical as well, because again, not only better outcomes, but this gets at the equity issue. I'm just following the chat box, and people are raising that. What about the equity component? I think that's a really important part as well. How are the economics being allocated? I think that's a really important point. So I think the supply chain has a lot to do with it. Space is a supply chain based business, right? So it's all about assembling capability and being the tip of the spear and delivering value. And as a consequence, most of the economics are captured at the end state, right? Not along the way. So I think we also need to think about how are those economics distributed within the industry. I think that's a really important consideration.
Erica, are you seeing companies choose suppliers over another supplier because of governance and that being a sticking point?
So I can think of an example of it myself, but Amazon certainly says they do. It's a great way for companies to use their power to affect change, saying, I'm not going to work with you if your board looks like this. I'm not going to work with you if you're not committing to carbon neutrality. Companies have so much power now. I mean, CEOs have become like the fourth branch of government. They can really throw their weight around, and choosing who they hire diversely, and also working with people based on how they govern their own companies is a great way to do it. I also want to note, someone just put in the chat about hiring workers with disabilities. I think remote work has been a really powerful thing for workers with disabilities. You can stay at home. You don't have to say, I'm not going to take that job in New York because I don't want to deal with navigating how to get around in Manhattan with my disability. And it's a great opportunity for all sorts of companies, especially space companies, because as the question asker says, a lot of folks have a really unique way of seeing the world to include people with disabilities in the talent pool. And I think remote work is going to keep powering that and keep making it more possible.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. And I want to switch gears slightly to special purpose acquisition companies now, or SPACs, which are transforming the space industry in the US by injecting significant sums of capital in it and giving rise to a new era of public space companies. For those who may not know, SPACs they're also known as blank check firms, and they raise money by listing on a stock market with a promise of buying a valuable company at a later date. And they are growing in popularity in many industries, but have been particularly notable in space because this is an industry that tends to require a lot of upfront capital to get assets up into space, and it can be challenging to get that in other ways because it can be many years before a company starts generating revenues from a business. So SPACs are helping a lot of early stage space companies to leapfrog that funding gap. But aren't there governance consequences to this type of investment vehicle? Because the space company ends up inheriting the board of the SPAC, and you know, they may not be exactly aligned. Dylan, Voyager no doubt has been closely following the SPAC trend, hard not to. What are your thoughts on the implications of SPACs for governance?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jason. I have pretty strong views on it. I think a lot of the SPACs, the sponsors are not credible. And by that, I mean, they're not necessarily excited or passionate about the industries that they're pursuing deals in. And there's heavy financial incentives to just get a deal done. And typically, the way these deals are structured, they're not going to be in it long enough. So they're not really thinking long term. There are exceptions. There are exceptions to everything. But in general, that's the dynamic. And so oftentimes the boards are sort of constructed in that fashion as well. It's a lot of board members that might have a financial sponsorship within the SPAC. Again, you know, to me, that's a little bit of a conflict as well, right? So I think the incentives are probably misaligned in most cases. And when you think about, you know, I tell my team this because we get a lot of calls from SPACs, as you might expect. I say, look, getting public is the easy part. The hard part is being a high quality public company. Because if you look at the 7,000 or 8,000 public companies in the US, you know, maybe 10% of them are well run and responsible and kind of triple bottom line or quadruple bottom line companies. So I think you really need to make sure you know, if you want to build to the sky, you need a very strong foundation. So I think, you know, implicit in your question, I think is the point I would make, which is I'm not sure the financial incentives are aligned with building a long-term company that's creating value, not only for shareholders, but for other stakeholders, society, employees, other institutions, you know, that are impacted by those companies as well. And, you know, I want to go back to what Erica said. You know, multinational corporations are one of the most powerful institutions on planet Earth, right? And their capability to get stuff done far outstrips most nation states, frankly, because they can move quicker and their span of control is larger. The promise for a multinational corporation doing the right thing is very, very, very high. They can have a huge impact, but the inverse is also true, right? So I think your point's a great one, Jason. I think governance is key, and I think in most SPAC situations, the deck is really stacked against long-term good governance, in my view.
Erica, is this something you've been following closely? Is the SPAC trend a threat to good governance?
Yeah, I mean, I will defer to Dylan. He definitely knows more on this than I do. But I would say, you know, anything that is jumping over hurdles, moving super quickly, can leave not a lot of room for accountability. And then that can come later when it hurts most, you know, and you can't hide forever. Like companies that get big, no matter how they got there, they're going to face all the judgment on Twitter. If you're ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange and you've got all white people up there, someone's going to take a screenshot of that and you're going to have to answer to everyone on Twitter for weeks. So, you know, any kind of system that slows it down, that makes sure that accountability is there at every step is great. If you're going to move quickly, then you better make sure that you're looking internally and making sure governance is strong, ESG is strong, and your values are strong.
Right. All right. And others, the SPAC frenzy is really a US thing, I suppose. Technology advances like the ability to construct very capable CubeSats and get them up to space easier than ever before helps lower the barrier to entry, which is great for nations like Nepal, but you're still locked out of this kind of capital. Is that right?
That is correct in a way that most of the capital is coming from the government, number one. And since we don't have those policies in place, we don't have access to those funds. And if you really look at our R&D fund, it's only 0.5% of the entire budget, and which is really shocking, to be honest. Our ministry, the Science and Technology Ministry, was only formed in the 1990s. That tells you quite a lot about where we are. And if you think about space, the total amount of investment from Nepal has been $150,000 till date, right? So that's not significant at all. $50,000 is minimum to put a kilo up in space these days. So, in a way, what that has allowed us is to become creative. What we have done right now is through our organizations, we have gone into a PPP model where the government funding will come later on, but in the time being, we are looking at corporate social responsibility funds from banks, from insurance companies, whoever is willing to fund and chip in. We're willing to take that money and train the next generation, right? But I think in many ways, it does have a trickle-down effect on us. Whatever is happening in the US, whatever happening in other parts of the country, of this space and world, what we do see is because the price is coming down, because everybody wants to be in that space race, inclusiveness can actually be coming into our shores as well. So we can actually use the private funding to initially get the momentum running, get the policy started, and then eventually get more funds as we show that we can build satellites in Nepal as well. Thanks.
Do we need more funding innovation for this space economy to reach its true potential? You know, if we take a step back, space has moved from largely the domain of governments to billionaires to the venture capital investors, and then more recently there's been this push toward public space companies that are listed on the stock market, and that opens up space to a much broader spectrum of investors and a greater proportion of people. But is there a step beyond that, perhaps? Someone mentioned the other day, the state of Alaska, for instance, every citizen there gets a cut of the oil revenue that's generated. As we start to think about mining asteroids, should the benefits of that go more directly to humanity rather than those pioneers that are admittedly taking on all the risk there? Now, Dylan, I don't know if you have any thoughts to share on this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think I think the short answer is yes. I mean, I think we should figure out ways to, you know, make the economics more widespread. I want to go back to what you said a little bit earlier, though, on, you know, the role of government here. I do think that there are incentives that the government could provide on capitalization. And again, I want to go back to the idea that, you know, and I think it was Erica's point as well, that, you know, maybe we tie some of this capital and some of this incentive capital to ESG initiatives, right? So you're coming sort of full circle with the outcomes that you want to create. So I mean, I think what we need is more progressive viewpoints on how to disrupt industries in the best sense of that term, and sort of get them, you know, more forward leaning. And I do think government has a role to play here. And I don't think in general that regulators and institutions are being strategic enough with the way they're thinking about driving change. And again, that's back on us, right? We need to advocate for those kinds of solutions. So discussions like this, I think, are really important.
Yeah, and good governance, of course, is about expanding representation and cooperation. So does the trend toward inward-looking nationalism kind of limit the potential for the space economy in any way? Is it a kind of threat to governance?
Short answer is probably yes. I mean, if you look at the natural state of business, it's to globalize, right? Every industry left to its own devices is going to become more global. Space has been less so because of you know, regulatory pressures like ITAR and other facts, and you know, those are practical considerations. You can't just wave those to the side. But I think in general, if we're going to solve some of these really large technical problems in space, and also make a bigger difference on DE&I, I think we need to, you know, not stick to our nationalistic swim lanes. I think we need to be thinking at a higher level, you know, at a minimum at a regional level. What I think is likely going to happen, Jason, is we'll have two ecosystems. one sort of a Western democracy ecosystem, which I hope becomes more robust. I hope Five Eyes is expanded. I hope we become more cohesive in that regard. And then you'll have a Chinese-led consortium. And unfortunately, I don't see any overlap there. I think that's a hard and fast line. But within the lines that we do have, within the boundaries we do have, we can be doing a much better job of collaborating, in my view.
Erica, for those of us in the space industry, it's been stunning to see commercial enterprises really stepping up in recent years to build out a space economy, to explore what's out there and push the envelope in terms of capabilities and potential. As that trend accelerates, how much of the responsibility for building out the space economy do you think will fall upon the corporation? I know you write a lot about the chief purpose officer. Do you think that person will ultimately be the one who drives the space economy and leads in developing new tools for governance?
I think yes, because so much of space is about discovery, is about, you know, seeing more of our universe and seeing if there's stuff out there that can help all of humanity. So it is so implicitly tied to purpose. And even space companies, it's not a far jump for them to think beyond profit. I mean, you know, there's that exploration piece of it, that, you know, that stereotype of the billionaire who was a nerd as a kid and now wants to go to space with all of his money, like Bezos and Musk, is a real one. I think a lot of people want that to be the next frontier. So I think, I mean, from my perspective, I'm not rooted in the space industry, but I think it's a good thing that corporations are coming in and really upping the ante for governments, and like Dylan said, making this more of a global thing. But again, as it relates to space, from my perspective, it does also seem like national security risks are there. So it's going to be a delicate balance there. I mean, you see a lot of companies in the US now that are unrelated to space grappling with the China question. And it's going to be only a matter of time before the space companies themselves have to say, okay, how do we work with China? Can we work with China? And that's gonna have a lot higher stakes for space companies than, say, an e-commerce company.
Thank you. And I've just seen the time. I think we might have to pause there and hand it over to Lou and Joe, who are going to come back to the virtual stage. And I know they'll have some burning questions for the panel, but also we'll get to the audience questions that have come in as well. But thank you very much. It was a massive topic and we aren't going to get through everything we wanted to get through, but let's see if we can pick up some of these topics when we get back a little later. And I think you're muted, Lou.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the theme of the COVID era. I think you're on mute is going to be the title of this in the history books. But I'm so glad that everyone today had their microphones on unmuted. That was a remarkable conversation, and hopefully we can extend it in future series. It was really terrific. So Jason, I really want to thank you for orchestrating that conversation. And for those of you who probably don't know this, Jason just became a father. So I wanted to congratulate him because she is going to inherit the world that Dylan, Abbas, and Erica are talking about. Joe, you know, before we go to questions and go back to our guests, you know, Dylan, I sensed his frustration. People need to get beyond checking the box. People aren't trying hard enough. And so, you know, it sort of begs the question, how to motivate them? How do you get them to act? You know, he said 10% of us are not going to be good enough to get us there. He talks often about an investment for everyone, a return for everyone. And I think we should ask him a little bit more about that, tying ESG to government funding. It sounds like social engineering, but maybe it's necessary. Abbas, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of points, Lou. First of all, you know,
Sure.
the best way to get people to act is through the dynamic force of example. And I really want to thank Dylan for being a leader in this industry. The other factor that helps people to act is accompaniment, okay? And that's the whole nature of the Space Business Roundtable. We're not here to talk about comfortable issues that we can all, you know, pretend to be experts on. The role of governance and how corporations should be organized, how national governments should behave and act is really, you know, it's under the microscope, right? We're looking at and saying, hey, some of the old models just don't fit. Maybe we need some, you know, new wine skins for the new wine, so to speak. We don't have all the answers here, but the purpose of the Space Business Roundtable is to address these difficult questions. So, I really want to thank Jason for facilitating this conversation. I think he did a great job moderating, and the inputs from Erica and others were, really helpful here. But let's be uncomfortable with the fact that we're, looking at something new and different, right? This is not totally cool yet, but shortly it's going to be more than cool. It's going to be essential. We don't yet really understand. I mean, as we said, we don't want to create, I do not want to see ESG be a check the box phenomenon that becomes another football in the political game that goes on every day, right? I'd like to see us get down to the core human values behind our common desire to produce a better world. Because as I said, I really think that's something that's implicit in the space industry. We come to space because it's fun, because it's cool, but also this whole overview effect concept becomes very contagious in people where we start to see the world through a different lens. So
yeah.
I'm very hopeful. I'm very enthused that we're, everyone joined us today to take this on. And again, I think we can all be that dynamic force of example as Dylan has shown in this industry.
Yeah, and we've still got some time to go here, so we can ask a few more questions. Abbas, had said something. We uncovered something there that the Nepal government really is waiting for this PPP model. It looks like to reveal itself, and Abbas has almost single-handedly worked with groups to get funding to sort of get that traction to move the government. He also said he's looking at Chinese and Filipino frameworks to plan ahead. And you have to ask yourself, what mistakes can Nepal avoid by looking at best practices going into this? So maybe he can address that one. And finally, Erica really got my attention with her context, the war for talent, I think it was, Joe, when she said companies are replacing religions. Well, Sister Mary Pauline, long gone, would really be shocked to hear that, but it is probably a fact. And she said corporations now are the focus of social issues. So that puts an awful lot more pressure on what historically has not been the moral commanders of our societies. So, I wanted to hear her say more about that. And also I wanted to tell us how it felt to be a panelist instead of the interviewer on this. So I don't know. What do you think? Should we turn it back to Jason?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Erica,
Jason,
we'd like to start a list of questions there. I think Erica, and then we'll move on to Abbas.
Yeah, Erica, what happened to religion?
Sure, absolutely. So first I want to say, Jason, you did an amazing job. And this has been, I've been on and moderated a bunch of panels, and this seems to be truly a situation where you're asking questions that there isn't an answer out there to that people can just say. We're really grappling with this in real time, which is super fascinating and really cool event. On religion, I've talked a lot about, it's been widely reported that companies need to focus on purpose more, that people care more, that if something happens, such as the George Floyd killing, and your company doesn't have a statement ready to go, you're going to get skewered on the internet. What I was really interested in, though, is like the why behind that. And a lot of it is because a lot of young folks are all about work. They're about their work, they're about their social life. They're not really getting married that young anymore. So their 20s are mostly focused on their careers, and they're increasingly agnostic or atheist or just don't, attend church that much. So when they are looking for a higher purpose, something in life to believe in, a lot of them are turning to their employers, and they want their employers to be, working for something bigger, to say, I'm not just a retailer, I'm a company that's trying to give goods to all people. They want their company to get involved in volunteer opportunities. Otherwise, they'll just quit and find someone who does. And, people care more and more about this, especially in the COVID era, because when you're working from home and you're remote, you lose that social interaction with your colleagues. So your employer giving you a sense of belonging, giving you a sense to keep plugging forward is becoming all the more important. And the latest research says that people care about this purpose even more than a promotion. So it's really the real deal.
And Abbas, we got a request from the chat to talk more about corporate social responsibility funds. What are those,
Sure.
and how are they governed?
So for the case of banks here, the central bank has mandated every bank that they set aside 1% of their profit for any social responsibility activities, right? Interestingly, it's not enlisted for science and technology, it's enlisted for health, it's enlisted for education. So what we have done is basically a workaround where we have said it's for education, it's for educating the next generation of space engineers. And that's how we have been receiving small amount of funds, $5,000, $10,000. That still helps us because if you really look at a engineer's income in Nepal, it's $300, right? So if you get $5,000, you can still move ahead. You can have a group of people working round the clock on satellite systems. Obviously, we are working very closely with Thailand. We are working closely with India. Recently, we sent a team to India to test our satellite systems. They were very much helpful. ISRO was there involved, and they recommended a company there. So I think what not to do, especially with the framework, what Jacques was talking about previously was interestingly, what we looked at was not just China, India. We looked at what Mongolia and what Bangladesh was doing. And interestingly, what they did was they launched a communication satellite. Now, the problem was that they didn't have enough capacity to use those the satellite themselves. So it was the rate of investment for those satellites was really low. I would say it was really bad investment. So that's something that Nepal should really focus on capacity building, focus on smaller investments, try to narrow down on the leakages because we have the funding. $150,000 is not a big deal for Nepali government because one car here costs $150,000 because the taxation is so high, right? So if one satellite is equivalent to one small satellite, my principal argument is the leakages have to be narrowed down. The budget has to be utilized properly. It has to be focused. If the space agency is formed, it has to be focused on smaller steps, baby steps towards bigger satellites. And I think that's the way forward for Nepal. And I would say the only way forward. And that's what we're doing at this moment. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dylan, a question about a topic I didn't get a chance to cover, and that's ITAR compliance, very specific to the space industry with governance implications. Question is that this person doesn't see DEI getting any better with ITAR export regulations. Is that sort of relevant for today's space economy?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm seeing the connection exactly. Maybe it was in relation to more globalization. I don't know. I mean, ITAR is probably an antiquated regulation, but I don't see it changing anytime soon. So again, there's lots of excuses as to why we can't do a better job. I wouldn't, people might say ITAR is one of them. I don't really see that as a restriction. I really don't. But happy to debate it, but I don't see it as a barrier.
To be more specific, ITAR limits in terms of hiring of foreign nationals, does that stand in the way to be more inclusive?
No, because there's so much low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, we need more inclusivity within our own country. We haven't exhausted that resource. So I'm not, again, I think to me, that's more of an excuse than anything else.
Good to know. Very cool. Well, thank you all so much again for your time today and taking on these big, important topics that dictate the future of not only the industry, but the world as we know it. And I will like to now pass on to Tamara, please.
Yes, I'm on mute. Okay, and now I'm not. So thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I want to thank our panelists, Dylan Taylor, Erica Pandy, Abbas Maski, who I'm sorry we weren't able to see, but I'm grateful for his contributions. We're going to keep this conversation going. We are continuing to explore ESG with the New York Space Business Roundtable, and our next session will be on the 17th of November. It will basically be for the rest of this year, every third Wednesday. So our next session will be social factors of the new space economy, We are looking forward to Mr. Richard Morrison of Competitive Enterprise Institute and Sabrina Alam of SES, along with others, to join us to expand on the conversation of what are the social factors in the new space economy. And in December, we will be engaging on the question of climate change, which is really where our industry shines, but we're going to break it down a little bit more. So, okay, it says my screen sharing is paused. Are you guys actually seeing my screen?
No.
No. Okay, let's try that again. Okay. I was going so well. Let's see. Okay. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. So there you are. So for the next 2 months, we will be continuing our exploration of ESG, next month with social factors, the following month with climate change. And I look forward to welcoming everyone back for that continuing conversation. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this back over to Lou. No, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to turn this over to Jason and see if Jason wants to invite more questions in.
I'm sure there are many. Let me try and get through to the.
So just a comment, we wrap up the formal portion of this at 1, just to respect everyone's time, but we keep the line open till 1:30 for any additional questions or conversations we want to hold.
A question just on how exactly do we move away from the checkbox mentality when it comes to leadership positions, the hire for EDI? What are the key components that organizations and leaders should be considerate about when tackling their confirmation biases, as Dylan mentioned? And I think this would probably go out to anyone who wants to take it. But maybe Dylan, do you want to add to that?
I think Dylan may have dropped
Okay,
just
they had a
to
flag.
catch, but I can comment on this. I've covered it on several industries, and I think the way to do it is to have a robust recruiting department that's going to build a diverse pool before they pick someone. So we're not saying you can't pick someone who's white and male to be a director. It's always still going to be about picking the best qualified candidate for the job, but make sure that the pool of people that you're looking at includes all kinds of people from all walks of life. And that means not just going to LinkedIn first connection, like Dylan said, that means going to different groups. There are several groups out there that, you know, it's Black women in space, or Asian Americans in space, or, you know, like LGBTQ professionals in space. There's lots of groups out there that you can work with. You just need to have, this can't be just something that the CEO or the CFO does and just, you know, sends a name into a recruiter. There needs to be an entire department of people. The bigger the company gets, the bigger the bigger the department has to be to find that diverse pool of folks to get through the rounds, and also make the interview process as inclusive as possible. So that means having several different people who look different interviewing the candidates, and having them give feedback on what they saw that very intentionally does not touch on anything beyond their qualifications and what they said in the interview. So there's ways to do it, but you really have to think about it, and you have to have entire departments devoted to it.
Very good answer, thank you. And Lou, did you have something to say? And you're muted again, I apologize.
Oh, my goodness. Only to just plug the current issue of Space News,
Oh,
the
hey,
October issue. It's how low can you go, which has nothing to do with this subject, actually. It's talking about very low Earth orbits. So that's the October issue, and you've still got 10 days to get it. So no, that was a very good topic. And I did want to thank our sponsors, the Luxembourg Investment and Trade Office, as well as World Teleport Association and the Washington Space Business Roundtable that are supporting us today. So I did want to do that bit of housekeeping. So I've done it. The house is clean.
Wonderful. I certainly appreciate that. Do we have time for one more question tomorrow? Is Abbas still on the call? We have a question I think would be suited for him.
Yeah, sure.
Brilliant. Okay. So I know you're very clued into the new space scene at the moment. So I think you'll like this one. How can we embolden new space companies to adopt CSRs as early as possible? Young companies have a lot on their plate. How do they go about tackling this?
It's a very good question. What we realized after some homework here is even in a country like Nepal, if you just target banks and their corporate social responsibility funds every year, you can launch 50 satellites. So that's quite a lot of funds lying around. So I think first thing is to just really study what CSR funds are available, what institutions are doing well, and what responsibilities they have towards society, what is mandated. I think that's the number one. And number two is to really look at what sectors they fund. So what we realized quickly was science and technology was not one of the sectors that they fund. So the workaround we did again was education. So educating the next generation of satellite engineers. That was the wording that we did. But I think to be honest, it's all about lobbying. The harder you lobby, not just the people who give the funds, it's also the policymakers, right? So let's say in case of Nepal, the next step would be to go to the national bank, to the main bank, and to lobby hard so that science and technology is included in CSR, so that private companies now, which are related to new space, which are connected to science and technology, can then tap into those funds. So in case of Nepal, that's more of a practical example. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you, Erica, too. That's great. That's all from me. I think I might go and get a chance to nap while I still can. And the baby is still behaving herself. But thank you, Lou and Joe, as well, for inviting me back to handle this discussion. It's been very fun and informative. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you,
Jason.
Jason.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And yes, Abbas, we'll let you get to bed now because we know it's time for sleep there as well.
Thanks.
And Erica, thank you so much for making the time. It was great. And
Thank you.
We hope you'll
Jack,
come back.
it was always good talking to you as well. Thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll see you next month. Remember, we're the third Wednesday of every month. And Joe, over to you to close.
Okay.
Joe
Joe,
might
are
be
you on mute?
Well, on behalf of Joe Fargnoli and myself, Lou Zaccarella and Tamara Bond-Williams, SSPI, and the New York Space Alliance, thank you once again. Take care, everybody. And remember, let's make it a better satellite world.
Thank you all. And the meeting will end.